Corps of Engineers as part of the request for a jurisdictional determination on the site, and is contained within the Corps' files. Again, the fact that the Corps issued a jurisdictional determination for the site indicates that all of the data that they received was deemed to be accurate and adequate for them to make a jurisdictional determination on the property.
Okay. Is that it? All right, one moment. I'm trying to connect them clearly with the cross. And then I guess I just want a clarification of whether you were involved in any of the wetland hydrologic modeling that will be discussed later.
Again, I did none of the hydrologic modeling of the site whatsoever. The modeling of the hydrology on the site was done by Goldsmith.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
Thank you.
No other questions. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Wright, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Hearing Examiner Rice.
I think it's time for applicant witness 2 for today. Is that right?
And I just want to clarify who that is. Is that still Mr. Goldsmith?
That is still Mr. Goldsmith.
Okay. Right. Great. And is there, how long do we, I think it was 30 minutes. Was there another witness after that, just so that I can get my own experts?
I believe that after Mr. Goldsmith, there will be a city witness, Michelle Campbell.
Okay.
Because we were trying to keep traffic testimony together, or keep that topic testimony together, rather.
Okay.
That sounds efficient.
All right.
Mr. Goldsmith, you look vaguely familiar.
Yes.
I believe I saw you last week.
Yes, you did, Examiner Rice. I
Would you-
testified at the PCI land use hearing.
Great. Would you please reintroduce yourself, and I will swear you in again, sir.
Keith J. Goldsmith, Keith, initial J, Goldsmith, with Hugh G. Goldsmith and Associates, Inc., or Goldsmith.
Sir, if I could swear you in, do you swear or affirm your testimony will be true? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you. Ms. Kaler, go ahead.
Oh, apologies. I wasn't sure if I was unmuted or not. I had to check. Good afternoon, Mr. Goldsmith.
Right.
Hello. Can we please start with a brief summary of your qualifications?
Sure. As I said, I work for Goldsmith. I've worked here as an engineer and land use consultant for over 40 years. I've been a licensed professional engineer in the state of Washington for 33 years. My work and Goldsmith's work is predominantly on, has always predominantly been residential and master plan community developments involving major infrastructure improvements and expansions, and ones with significant challenges in balancing both environmental and economic successes. I have had a lot of firsthand experience with projects requiring master drainage planning on a large basin scale, involving innovative stormwater management strategies and design for protection of water resources. Became president of Goldsmith in 2002, but we're a small company, so I maintain a presence as a project manager for projects like Snoqualmie Mill.
Thank you. And I am going to share my screen here. And I am showing you, it has been identified as Exhibit M. Oh gosh. Exhibit M4, I believe. It doesn't have a label on it. Let me just double check that. Yes, Exhibit M4. Can you tell me what this is?
That is an in-house resume with a 2008 photograph.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Goldsmith, and I'll ask for the admission of Exhibit M4.
I don't see any reason to object to, and doubt seriously Ms. Clengen will object. I will admit the resume.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Mr. Goldsmith, can you describe what your role has been with regard to this project?
Yeah, Goldsmith is both a civil engineer and land surveyor, as well as a land use consultant. We're involved in surveying and development of base data, such as boundary, topography, site features, critical areas surveys, following the biologist delineations in order to map all the resources accurately. We provide assistance to the owner and the planners or architects in developing the PCI plan, providing input on land use code and knowledge of site work and construction, requirements for grading, drainage, roads, utilities, stormwater management, floodplain, shoreline management regulations, and the like. We prepared a master drainage plan for the PCI as required by Snoqualmie Drainage Code, which provided analysis of stormwater management and water resources protection requirements, floodplain management strategies, feasibility and design of infrastructure extension requirements. This is all required as part of the code, but also the master drainage plan served as Appendix A to the draft environmental impact statement.
All right, thank you. So Mr. Goldsmith, obviously you've done a lot on this project, but I'm just going to ask you today to discuss some specific issues that are raised in this appeal and that we heard testimony on from appellants in previous days. So specifically, I would ask, were you here to listen to the testimony of Dr. Cook?
Yes, I was.
And did you hear her testimony that there was either no analysis or insufficient analysis of impacts to wetland hydrology?
I did.
And can you respond?
Yes, I will try not to be too repetitive with Mr. Wright because he did such an excellent job describing most of it. But it's a requirement of both ecology and city stormwater regulations that specific demonstration of post-development conditions not having too much or too little hydrology fed to the local wetlands and streams compared with current conditions. And in this case, after most of the site will be routed directly to the Snoqualmie River. There are specific, Chris spoke to this briefly, there are specific modeling methods and criteria outlined by ecology and in the stormwater management manual to demonstrate this. They're actually called Wetland Hydrology Protection Guidelines. I believe that this is the type of modeling that Ms. Cook was describing should have been done, and in fact was done. Modeling was conducted for wetlands on the site that could be affected by the development of Planning Area 1. This included Wetland 12, as spoken to earlier, but it actually was broken into two smaller catchments. One we called 12 West, and one was called 12 Central.
And I'll just go ahead and share my screen so that we can, I know Mr. Wright had identified where those were, but since you're discussing them, I'll put that up here so that we can be clear on what we're talking about. So let's see here.
So
Scroll to the
any
page
one
that
of
has the
those,
ones. This good enough?
well,
No,
that
no,
one's really
maybe-
hard to
maybe This
see.
one was better. This one was better?
Yeah, I mean, so although you can't really see all of wetland 12 on this, wetland 12 extends easterly from where it's shown on this map.
And I'm now turning to page 100
Yeah.
of Exhibit C2, Appendix C.
And wetland 12 actually extends all the way nearly down to where it discharges into Borse Lake. And so since it splits into two specific reaches, one going westerly and one going north and then westerly, we broke that up and modeled them separately. So that we could isolate any impacts to each of those reaches, but it's still all wetland 12. And then we modeled wetland 28.
Thank you.
The
And
conclusion,
my cursor is here in the kind of southerly center section of Planning Area 1. Is that wetland 28?
and then wetland 28 flows through those ditches. It flows through wetland 29 and then into what we called wetland 12 west.
Thank you.
That modeling exercise done per the criteria that's outlined in the ecology and the King County Stormwater Management manuals was done and showed to be in compliance with the criteria cited. So I don't know whether Ms. Cook saw that in the appendix or not, but it was done.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you, since we're talking about it being in the appendix,
Thank you.
there is a narrative discussion of it in the appendix. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm also just going to jump here to page 143 of the PDF of Exhibit C2.
So I believe you're in Appendix C of Radke's Appendix C, correct?
That is correct on page 143. And
So-
of course,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead. This modeling is computer modeling, right? So it's not something that's really very easily graphically represented, but are these some graphics that represent some aspects of that modeling?
They are, and they were represented in Appendix A to the DEIS of C2 in the master drainage plan. Radke just extracted those and included them as part of their appendix as reliance on a demonstration of lack of hydrologic impacts.
Thank you. And I will, just for the record, if everyone can pardon my scrolling, I don't mean to make anybody dizzy here, but I want to locate the appendix that I'm going to stop sharing so that I can
Thank
scroll
you.
through a little bit easier and not disturb everybody's vision, but I do want to just be sure we have in the record the appendix that is the master drainage plan that Mr. Goldsmith is talking about, so that we all know what he's discussing and where to find it. And so I have now opened it, and I am going to share my screen once again. Mr. Goldsmith, this is Appendix A to the draft EIS, as opposed to Appendix C, which we were just looking at. They're both parts of Exhibit C2. And is this the document that you were referring to that contains your hydrologic analysis as well as other information?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I won't scroll through it to find that, but just for the parties.
Well, I may want to refer to a figure in here, so just keep it.
I'll keep it open. I'll keep it open. Let me know if you do.
Yeah.
And so did you hear Dr. Cook's testimony about what this hydrologic modeling should include?
I did, yes. I felt that Ms. Cook accurately described data that is needed as input to a hydrologic model like this. I believe she mentioned, if I wrote my notes correctly, I think she mentioned soil, vegetation cover, impervious surfaces, etc. The way the manual describes this input is they say specifically soil type, surface vegetation, land slope, and land area. But it also includes input of local precipitation data of record in order to build an accurate continuous model for a particular site. And so that's what was done here. That's where, so if you open the master drainage plan.
Certainly will do that. So we're looking again, exhibit C2.
Yeah.
Appendix.
Appendix A, if my PDF numbering is correct, it should be page 91. And it should be figure 6-3.
All right, let's see, my computer's really thinking hard about loading these graphics.
Yeah, they're big and they're ugly.
Yes, here we go. I believe we can now see figure 6-3. Let me know if I should enlarge or zoom in on any particular part of this.
If the examiner or anyone else needs you to zoom in, yes, but I'm just showing that this is a graphic depiction of the data takeoffs of the land use and split into specific small basin or catchment areas for that drain into these wetlands, whether it's wetland 28 or 12 west or 12 central. And they're shown there. There's actually an extra basin there called wetland 12 northwest, but that's combined with wetland 12C for the analysis because that entire reach of wetland acts as one. The control of any water levels or water release from that wetland is all the way down at the southern end of what's called 12C and backs all the way up into 12 northwest. So that's why there's only graphs depicted for 12C and not a separate one for 12NW. But these takeoffs are done for area, land cover, impervious surfaces, and then we obtain the soil types from the geologist. And then on the next page, figure 6.4.
See if I can scroll there, one moment.
Is the same type of analysis done for the post-developed conditions. And it shows how, it's very hard to see, I understand, but it shows how the basin or catchment areas around these, around areas draining into the wetlands are proposed to be changed, but the area and the land use cover and the soil type and impervious surfaces, et cetera, put into the model for each of those catchments is done for this condition. And that's where the comparison between the two is represented in those output graphs, showing that the criteria established by ecology has been met.
Okay, thank you. Stop sharing my screen. And so just returning to those, the specific, I guess, inputs that Dr. Cook described, is that in fact the analysis that you did for wetlands 12 and 28
Yes.
And then did you hear Dr. Cook testify that modeling was not done for individual wetlands?
Yes. I mean, I only presume her comment was related to a comment she made on the DEIS, which was something to the effect that modeling was not provided for every individual wetland on the property. And that is true. But stating that modeling was not performed for wetlands that would potentially be affected by development of planning area 1, that's not accurate.
And so then as to planning areas 2 and 3, why was that same modeling not performed at this time?
Well, 2 reasons. One, Chris spoke to it to some degree, Chris Wright, in that there really is no specific development proposal yet. But in the master drainage plan, we did discuss that, this type of wetland analysis as outlined in the ecology criteria, it weighs the anticipated future development runoff conditions with the current runoff conditions of the property. And the property, most significantly over in planning areas 2 and 3, have a significant amount of existing impervious surfaces. Planning area 1 has the highest degree of converting pervious to impervious, and therefore the highest likelihood of a hydrologic impact due to that conversion to impervious surfaces. When we were able to demonstrate through planning area 1 that this criteria can be met by the approach taken to the grading and the stormwater system, we concluded that there's a very high likelihood that it will be accomplished over in planning areas 2 and 3 when there's a plan to model, because the change between the level of impervious surfaces over there on the ground between current conditions and post-development conditions, the change in that will be very small. And therefore the change in hydrology off of those surfaces through the wetlands will be very small.
Will this modeling ultimately be done for the wetlands in planning areas 2 and 3?
I assume so. Everywhere through the application and the EIS document, it's always stated that planning areas 2 and 3 will require additional environmental review, but were necessitated to be included in some form of a larger master plan by the PCI code.
And particularly with reference to the King County Stormwater Design Manual requirements that you discussed earlier, does the King County Surface Water Design Manual require that this analysis be done before actual development occurs?
Oh, this same analysis will have to be provided again, even for planning area 1, when actual permits are applied for to grade and construct impervious surfaces on the property. This is a site plan, and it was done here for purposes of demonstrating that it can be accomplished. But the same analysis will have to be done with the actual design that goes in for permits.
And so you're talking about, as opposed to a more planning level design that we have here, when you have actual construction level design, you will run this model again, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and will the same thing happen for planning areas 2 and 3 when you have actual construction level drawings?
That's my assumption. Yeah.
And would that be required under the stormwater manual?
Yes, it would.
Okay. So again, turning to Dr. Cook's testimony, did you hear her testimony that you need to monitor current conditions for each wetland?
I did. I don't know whether Mr. Wright adequately spoke to that by virtue of the monitoring that they performed for their delineation purposes. But there, obviously that monitoring was done. And that was quite extensive. The only other monitoring that was done that I relied on was performed by Associated Earth Sciences, where they did monitor groundwater wells. And I think that was brought up by Ms. Klungen earlier.
And so I think my specific question for you is with regard to the requirements of the stormwater manual that you just discussed for this wetland hydrologic modeling.
Yeah,
Just trying to narrow it down and keep it on the topic of the wetland hydrologic modeling. Is that monitoring something that is required by the stormwater manual in order to perform this modeling that you conducted?
No, it's not. Ecology describes that monitoring can be done, and it's data that you can obtain for a particular wetland for a particular purpose. But for this purpose of evaluating whether or not a wetland is at risk or a likely significant impact from the change in land use cover and development, it's not required. The standard modeling methods are there and provided for that purpose.
Thank you. And I have no further questions for this witness.
Okay. Let's go in the same order. I'll check in first with the city. Does the city have any questions for Mr. Goldsmith? Mr. Sturbank shakes his head no, thank you.
I'm sorry, no, yeah.
Okay. Does the appellant have cross-examination for this witness?
Yes, just a couple of questions. Hi, Mr. Goldsmith.
Hi.
So the data that was showed for the hydrology modeling for the wetlands, is that surface flow?
The graphic that was shown was an outline of the surface basin or the surface watershed that flows into a particular area or a wetland. The data that's accounted for in the model is both surface water and groundwater from the precipitation based on the soil type, slope, and land cover.
Okay. Is the rain data the main on-site data you used in that model?
Yeah. What was the question?
You mentioned precipitation as part of that model. Is it was the primary data used for that model, or what else?
The model from Ecology, the WWHM, it's called. It was developed by Ecology, called the Western Washington Hydrologic Model. And what it does is it runs a lengthy period of record of actual record rain data. And in this case, in the case of the criteria, you run it for 50 years. And so you obtain local rainfall data that's available for that 50-year record. And so you model the response that the site has seen over that period of record, and then you run it again with the post-developed conditions. But you get local rainfall data depending on where you are. Rainfall data, say over in Kitsap County, would be vastly different than it is here.
Okay. In addition to the rain data, what about groundwater inputs for that data? How was that accomplished?
The only groundwater component that's accounted for is the amount of precipitation that seeps into the soil based on the soil type. groundwater from what's been talked about, some of these wetlands extending vertically down and intercepting what's called a shallow aquifer is not accounted for in the model, because we're looking for a change in the response based on the development, and there's nothing about that shallow aquifer that's changing.
I'm sorry, I just want to clear. So the response from the development before the development has occurred.
And after,
Okay.
the response to rainfall
Okay.
is what I mean. So that there's there's a response to rainfall in both surface water and seepage into the ground. And those are accounted for in this model. A shallow aquifer that is exposed in some of these wetlands is not accounted for in that model, but is basically just bonus hydrology.
Okay. Is it reasonable to expect that that shallow aquifer might change with site when the site is graded?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. Also, if you're around for Mr. Wright's testimony, the FEIS mentioned one groundwater well related for a number of wetlands on or adjacent to phase 1. Mr. Wright said that the groundwater monitoring is done. Is there additional data that is not part of this FEIS or that was related to that one monitoring well that we have not seen?
No. Okay. It was referenced that the well you brought up was a part of the geologist's studies to identify the shallow aquifer and the high elevations of the groundwater levels in that shallow aquifer. That's one of the wells that was used to do that, the one that was mentioned earlier. That was the purpose of it, but that's been referenced in the master drainage plan as well as the I guess what would be called Appendix B to the DEIS.
Okay.
Soils and groundwater.
All right. And was that data from the data from the well we were talking about a component of the mathematical model for this drainage plan in any way?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it was used in the drainage plan and the grading plan, yes, but not this model for wetlands.
Okay. So there are some catchments modeled. The pre-development identifies a contributing basin for a wetland. When the grading plan is implemented, there was a new drainage basin for the wetland, but how does that maintain the hydrologic regime?
I'll just object to the extent that the question includes, assumes facts not in the record in terms of a change in the drainage basin.
Can you help us understand what you're referring to, Ms. Clinton?
I was referring to the grading plan, I guess in some ways adjusting or having an impact on the drainage basin, but I guess it was your opinion that the grading will not impact that. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. The grading plan does, as I said earlier, it does change where those basin or catchment boundaries will be.
Mhm.
And so then we take the newly configured basin or catchment area to that wetland and modeled it the same way that we modeled it in the pre-development conditions to make sure that that newly defined area and its land cover provides enough hydrology to the wetland.
Okay. And again, is that data reflected in the EIS or in this appendix?
Yes, all the measurements of those areas and the land use takeoffs are all tabulated.
Okay.
And the results of the model are in the form of those graphs, I think that Ms. Kaler had a flash of earlier.
Okay. And you mentioned there was going to be additional modeling in the future. So is updated modeling, would that be a condition of approval for future permits? And
It may be specifically a condition of approval. I don't recall, but it's required.
okay, all
when you
right.
submit the permits, yeah.
And will that include additional, hold on one sec. And you mentioned that the modeling was not performed on every wetland, but was it performed for wetlands, for all of the wetlands in planning area 1?
Not all of the wetlands in planning area 1.
Okay, which ones did it model?
It modeled wetland 12
Okay,
in its entirety, but it was broken up into 2 separate catchment areas.
Okay.
It modeled wetland 28, and then wetland 28 flows into wetland 29, which then flows into wetland 12. And so it was felt that there was no need to model that when both wetland 28 and 12 met its hydrologic criteria.
okay. And was there modeling done for adjacent wetlands?
Other wetlands that are outside of any influence by the development of planning area 1, we did not model.
Okay, and how did you determine the area of influence?
Well, so back to that graphic of figure 6-3 in Appendix A, we did define catchment areas for the greater site. And so we know by virtue of the grading, the preliminary grading plan for planning area 1, which, if any, catchment areas of those other wetlands would be potentially affected. And if they weren't, we did not model them.
Okay, and okay, and that model primarily uses rainfall data. Is that correct?
And the model of the site, which would generate what its runoff response to that rainfall is.
Okay. Okay, I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clengen. Ms. Kaler, any redirect of Mr. Goldsmith?
Just really briefly, thank you. Mr. Goldsmith, there were various questions about data. And so just so I'm fully understanding this modeling that you did, is it accurate that the model asks for certain data?
Yes,
And did you provide the data that the model requires?
yes.
There, I think a couple times, Ms. Clenchen asked, is the model, does it primarily rely on rainfall data? And I think in each case you did indicate that there is other information input into the model. Could you just briefly list off those other inputs again for me?
Soil type, surface vegetation, meaning and/or impervious surfaces, land slope, and land area.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay. Ms.
One-
Clenchen, you're unmuted. Did you have a further question?
Sorry, I just want to redirect just to confirm. It's related to those. Yes. The types of data for that model, hold on, I just want to be clear. Listed, it was vegetation and land slope and land area,
Soil type.
soil type, and then rainfall. But that does not include any groundwater data. Is that correct?
The model generates a groundwater component of the site's response
Okay.
to the rainfall.
Okay.
And all of this, those components of input, they're all listed out in what's called reference 5 to the King County Surface Water Design Manual, which is the wetland protection guidelines, the wetland hydrology protection guidelines.
Okay. And is the vegetation component, is that what is on the site currently, or what is expected on the site post-development?
It's both in either case.
Okay.
You measure which land area has trees versus grass versus gravel versus pavement or buildings. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
Other questions?
I believe we're completed with Mr. Goldsmith's testimony. Thank you very much, sir.
You bet.
That is correct, Ms. Examiner.
So the time is 3:25. Are we, is there another applicant witness, or are we proceeding with city witness now? And with either case, is it all right if we take a 5-minute break?
I was just going to request a break. And
Yes.
It's 3:25. Can we come back at 3:30? Great.
Yes.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Let's pause the recording for Thank you for starting the recording. Mr. Sturbank, are you ready to introduce your first city witness?
I am, Ms. Examiner. Thank you. The city would call Michelle Campbell. I believe she is in attendance and ready to be promoted to panelist.
Excellent. Hi there.
Afternoon.
Could we have you please state and spell your name for the record? Give us your correct title and then allow me to swear you in.
My name is Michelle Campbell, MICHELE-CAMPBELL. I am a director at RH2 Engineering.
Thank you very much. If I could get you to raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm your testimony will be true? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Mr. Sturbank?
Thank you, Ms. Examiner. Good afternoon, Ms. Campbell, and thanks for joining us. You mentioned you work at RH2. What is RH2?
It's a civil engineering consulting company
Okay, and how long have you been employed at RH2?
for 3 years.
I'm sorry, you cut out for a moment. Could you say that again, please?
23 years.
All right, thank you. And can you briefly describe your post-high school educational background?
I graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in civil and environmental engineering.
All right, and have you worked at RH2 continuously then since your graduation from the University of Washington?
Since before I graduated from University of Washington.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any professional licenses?
I am a professional engineer licensed in the state of Washington and the state of Oregon.
All right, and do you have any professional affiliations?
I am a member of the American Water Works Association for about 10 to 15 years.
Okay, thank you. Through your employment at RH2, do you have any experience in municipal water system planning?
Yes, I have prepared water system plans for over 50 water systems in the Pacific Northwest. I have also performed water system planning outside of water system plan documents for somewhere around 80 different water utilities.
Okay, and you were talking about doing water system plans for jurisdictions in the Pacific Northwest. Any ones in King County, Pierce County, Snoqualmie County?
Yes, City of Bellevue, City of Kirkland, City of Kent, Tacoma Water, Marysville, Snohomish, Stanwood.
Okay, have you done any water system planning for counties?
I have assisted with the preparation of the Whatcom County Coordinated Water System Plan.
Okay, and you've previously provided us your resume, and Ms. Examiner, that's marked as Exhibit C16. If it's not already admitted, the city would move admission of C16.
Again, I assume we don't have objections to resumes. Anybody who does, let me know.
No objection.
We'll admit C16.
All right, thank you, Ms. Examiner. So during the course of water system planning, do you have the occasion or opportunity to review proposed development projects for the adequacy of their proposed water supply?
Yes, within the water system plan process, we are, every water system plan, there is a water supply capacity analysis. We also perform those outside of water system plan processes in the course of our engineering consulting work.
And so in that engineering consulting work, are you considering water supply demands for particular proposed development projects?
Correct, if that is available.
Okay.
If specifics are available for the development, yes. Otherwise, there are general projections.
Okay, thank you. Have you participated in any SEPA environmental review of water system plans or projects or proposed development projects?
So as part of those 50 plus water system plans I've assisted with, everyone includes a SEPA review process. I've also been involved in other SEPA projects outside of water system plans.
Okay, so you're generally familiar with the process of SEPA environmental review?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And since you've used the term here today, and we've used it before in the hearing, a water system plan, so we know what we're talking about. Could you describe specifically what's entailed in a water system plan?
Yeah. What's entailed in a water system plan? Well, a water system plan is required by state statute by water purveyors to provide planning for the utility for a 20-year period. It includes a description of the existing water system. It includes a land use evaluation, population and demand projections, an evaluation of operations and maintenance, water supply, and other water distribution system capacity analyses. It is required to evaluate water rights and develop a CIP, a capital improvement plan for improvements of any deficiencies, and a financial analysis to confirm that the utility can financially support the improvements and the operations and maintenance of the system.
Okay, and separately from the water system planning, have you participated in design and or construction of water supply projects?
Most recently, for the city of Ellensburg, I assisted with the development of the Illinois well. Also for the city of Marysville, the Sunnyside well and Highway 9 well development, Stanwood and Tumwater, to name a few.
Okay, and are those projects the kinds of capital projects that you just mentioned would be included in the capital portion of a water system plan?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you have familiarity with the former Weyerhaeuser Snoqualmie mill site?
I do.
And are you generally familiar with the planned commercial industrial plan that's proposed by the applicant Snoqualmie Mill Ventures?
Yes, I have reviewed that.
Okay, and for those following along, we're talking about exhibits C6 and C6A, which I think the examiner has previously admitted. And as part of that, have you reviewed the water and sewer plan sheet that was part of that application?
Right, and yes, I have reviewed the updated version of that as well.
All right, thank you. What was the result of your review of the PCI plan application, or what were your conclusions?
Our conclusions were that, well, in terms of water supply specifically.
Yes.
I think I need to, excuse me, just want to either seek clarification or an objection. I'm not sure which, but as was the point made during our witnesses, to talk about the EIS, not about the plan. And I thought I heard this question being about the plan, so not
Fair
sure
enough.
it would be
And
relevant to
let
the
me
EIS.
redirect my questions then.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Bricklin.
You bet. Glad to help.
So Ms. Campbell, you were talking about your review of the PCI plan application. Did you also review the draft environmental impact statement for the PCI plan application?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us what was entailed in that?
The draft environmental impact statement stated that the Snoqualmie Mill Site Planning Area 1 has sufficient capacity in terms of water supply to support the development for Planning Area 1, but does not have sufficient capacity to support the supply for Planning Areas 2 and 3, and that the water system plan would be evaluating options for development of the additional water supply. It also references the 2016 water supply capacity analysis update by Grant Osborne, and states that one of the improved mitigation measures for supply capacity has been completed, and the two other are currently being evaluated. It also references that the city is considering implementation of an aquifer storage and recovery program to address future water right shortfalls. It also notes that the water system plan is ongoing, and those water supply alternatives are evaluations are ongoing.
Okay, thank you. So you said a lot there, and at the beginning you mentioned conclusions about sufficiency of water supply for planning area 1, but not for planning areas 2 and 3. Was that description in the draft environmental impact statement consistent with your analysis of the PCI plan application?
Yes, it was consistent.
Okay, and then you mentioned aquifer storage and recovery. What is that?
Aquifer storage and recovery, as it would be implemented potentially by the city, would be the withdrawal of water from the city's canyon source spring during the wet season, and basically injected into the aquifer at the city's well fields for later withdrawal during the dry season.
Okay, and is that sometimes referred to by its initials ASR? Is that the same thing? Okay.
Yes.
And is ASR implemented by other municipal water suppliers in Washington State?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm sorry, were you going to say something more about?
No.
And have you also had an opportunity to review the FEIS and its response to comments? And there I'm speaking specifically about page 3-13 of the final environmental impact statement.
3-113.
Yes.
Yes, I have.
And does that continue to reference the status of the city's ongoing water system planning process? I can do a screen. Okay. All right, just to draw your attention here to this highlighted language, is that the reference that you were referring to? Yes, okay, thank you. And are you currently involved in the update of the city's water system plan?
Yes, I am.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sturbank, what was that page number on that prior screenshot?
Sorry, Mr. Brickland, it was page 3-113 of the final environmental.
Of the final. All right, thank you.
The final, yes.
Yep.
All right. And also with respect to, I'm going to go back to that. Does the final environmental impact statement also reiterate the conclusion from the draft that there's sufficient water for planning area 1, but not for 2 and 3?
Yes, in that next paragraph there, it says that the updated water plan indicates the city has sufficient water to supply development planning area 1. The city will, however, need to obtain additional water supply to support future plan growth, including planning areas 2 and 3.
Okay, and elsewhere during this hearing, there's been some, I think, criticism of aspects of the EIS for not studying what might happen in 2 and 3 versus planning area 1. But did the PCI plan application estimate water demand and water supply for only planning area 1, or did it look at 1, 2, and 3?
It estimated the demand for planning areas 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, and in your review in the DEIS and the FEIS, did that also look out to planning areas 2 and 3?
It did.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, with respect to the ongoing water system planning, has the city identified additional potential options for water supply?
Yes. So similar to what is noted in the DEIS regarding the so the ASR program that was referenced in the DEIS is also discussed in the water system plan as a potential option for resolving the supply deficiency. Also the water system plan, and that's there's a capital improvement program identified for that. It's CIP M1 and M2 for the ASR that is currently underway. And then the water system plan also identifies CIP M4, which is water use efficiency improvements, or to reduce water use from existing and future customers.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
So that is what is the water supply alternatives for increasing supply in the future. There is also a discussion in the water rights planning section of the water system plan that references that The city has some pending water rights applications, and if the ASR program is not implemented, then the city can go back to the and try to process those pending applications.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to screen share here again briefly, and point you to page 6-7 of the water system plan for council. This is exhibit C8, page 6-7. So you were just talking about the water system plan update, identifying consideration of ASR and other options. Is this the portion of the discussion to which you were referring?
That's right. And then in the paragraph prior to that, there is also discussion about that references a note in the DEIS regarding water right change application. So in that DEIS, there was acknowledgement that there was some water right change applications. Those were have now been implemented and are reflected in the water system plan. But at the time of the DEIS, they had not yet been.
Okay. And that's reflected in the water system plan discussion?
That's correct.
Okay. And if I jump forward to, you mentioned the ASR investigation. That's a separate capital project later on down in the plan. I'm going to go off screen share so I can scroll to that. Pardon me, Ms. Examiner, just one moment. And again, for council, this is page 9-10 of exhibit C8. Ms. Campbell, are these the capital improvement investigation, supply investigation projects that you were previously referencing?
That is correct. Yes, CIP M1 and CIP M2.
Okay. We'll go navigate away from those. And let's see, I think you were pointing to that portion of the discussion of investigation of ASR on page 6-7. I believe it referenced a city grant application with the Department of Ecology. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am. And the city was awarded that grant for the ASR pilot program.
Oh, and can you speak to the status of that at all?
I believe the city and Ecology are currently under contract negotiations for that grant.
Okay.
With a consultant, with a separate consultant.
Okay, thank you. And during the course of your water supply work, have you identified any other options for additional supply, particularly as it might affect the mill site and the proposed PCI plan?
Yeah, as part of our review of the some comments from the Department of Health on the draft water system plan, we have evaluated recent water use from in the past few years from the city, and have identified that the water use has not increased as projected. And so what that means is that there is additional supply capacity if we're looking out 10 years from now and 20 years from now. So we're not, the city's water use efficiency efforts that are have been funded under CIP M4 have apparently been working to help reduce water use in recent years. So what we're seeing right now is that the current demand is about 15 to 20% below what we had projected for 2020. The years, the water system plan showed actual water use through 2017. And so we were looking at years 2018, 2019, and 2020, which may be required to be updated into the water system plan. Therefore, projections might need to be expanded to represent that lower water use.
Okay, I'm going to do a screen share here of, Ms. Examiner, I've marked this as C25. If I can have the witness speak to this. Can you describe what's shown graphically here? I'll show you one graph and then a second one.
So this data shows actual water use in the average day demand in terms of gallons per minute for the city through the years 2011 through 2020. What is shown through 2017 was as reported in the water system plan, and 2018 and through 2020 were as reported to the Department of Health and the water use efficiency reports.
Okay.
And then
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. So then in the orange is what is shown as our projections from when we had prepared the draft water system plan, which shows it quite a bit higher than what we are seeing now.
Okay. And then I'm going to scroll down and this show you a second chart. And could you explain what's depicted here?
Yes, so this is a modified version of chart 7 from the water system plan. The part that was modified is the text there in the yellow and the magenta line. So that magenta line represents the actual ADD that was seen in that previous chart times a peaking factor to estimate the approximate maximum day demand, or what we use to compare instantaneous water rights to what is the supply capacity of the system. So in green is what we had projected for the maximum day demand with and without water use efficiency or conservation. And the blue line running across the chart is what the existing supply capacity is. And as you can see, we are tracking quite a bit lower than where we had projected to be at this time.
Okay, and this chart has a reference 7-1. Does that pertain to the water system plan at all?
That's chart 7-1 from the water system plan that has been modified to add the magenta line and the yellow note. Okay,
and would you anticipate incorporating this in the update to the plan before its final adoption?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That was the purpose of preparing these charts.
Okay. So is it fair to say that the takeaway from this data is that the city has more water right now than was previously taken into account in planning and in evaluating the mill site proposal?
Correct.
Okay. And Ms. Examiner, I can do this later or now. I would move the admission of exhibits, what's marked as C25.
I will ask council if there's any objection, starting with appellants.
So is C25 the draft plan? Just so I'm clear.
No, C8 is the draft plan. C25 are these two charts that the witness just testified about.
I think I would object on grounds of relevance. They're not incorporated in the EIS. If you want to let them in and give them whatever weight they're due, I think the weight will be 0. So I would object. I'm not going to have a conniption fit if you let them in. Either.
Well, I appreciate that promise not to have a conniption fit. Applicant, do you care to respond?
I guess I would just say that appellants have introduced or are seeking the introduction of many documents that are not specifically attached to or discussed in the EIS. And so I believe this document's relevant and should be admitted.
So I just want to explain to folks, I did stop video sharing for a moment because apparently my connection was unstable and I missed maybe some introductory conversation about this chart. When I came in, it was stated that the two charts are modified from water system plans. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. These charts were initially in C8, but they have been since modified. And I think Mr. Sturbank just elicited testimony that they would be included in the plan eventually, these modified plans. Ms. Campbell, did you prepare these modified charts?
I prepared these modified charts. The first chart is not a chart in the water system. Do you mind? Is not a chart in the water system plan. I prepared this for the development of the water system plan update to address Department of Health agency review comments on the plan. The second, but much of that data is included in the water system plan. This chart, this is chart 7-1 is included in the water system plan. I have modified it to show the magenta line and text there in the yellow box. Yes. To show the approximate maximum day demand where we're standing right now.
Okay. And can I just have council explain why this modified information that wasn't relied upon in the FEIS is relevant to the appeal of the FEIS?
It's relevant because the examiner has heard a lot of testimony and argument about that there are impacts that exist that were not analyzed in the EIS. And so that argument, the predicate is that there are impacts, and this data goes to rebut one of the central contentions, which is there's an impact because there's not enough water. So the appellants squarely raised the issue in their appeal. One of the few that they squarely raised is about the adequacy of water supply. The city's entitled to rebut the contentions and show what the actual data is.
Setting aside this argument, I want to ask the next question about the document, which is, was it prepared before the witness and exhibit list were disclosure deadlines? And is it late disclosed for a particular reason?
This is disclosed in rebuttal to Mr. Hill's testimony, which we are just about to get to, which is part of the testimony that I was summarizing there when I said there were contentions about impacts that are not analyzed.
Okay. So I am going to admit the document at C25, and I will take Mr. Brickland's advice to give it weight as I deem it relevant to the challenge to the FEIS. I just want to ask for clarification. I don't think my connection was unstable for too long, but we're at C25 and I didn't hear anything about C24, which is also not on the list. Did I miss discussion of C24, or is that going to be introduced later?
That'll be discussed a little bit later, and my apologies, Madam Examiner.
Oh, we've called the witnesses out of order. Yeah. All right, so I have admitted C25. Thank you for going through all that with me.
All right, thank you, Ms. Examiner. All right, Ms. Campbell, trying to pick up where we left off. So you were talking about the sort of the city's existing supply. Are there further options that you've identified about supply with respect to the mill site proposed PCI plan that may arise particularly out of what's proposed?
So another option to address the supply issue for the phases 2 and 3 are alternative water supply strategies for the development. What I mean by that is water use efficiency, implementing water use efficiency measures. So similar to what that chart shows, the city has a water use efficiency program to reduce water use that has been working. And so for the applicant specific for their project, they have identified the project as a LEED Gold or Platinum, or at least that they're pursuing that, which will likely lead to reduced water use than what we have projected as part of the water system plan. So as part of the water system plan, to be conservative for planning purposes, we applied a standard water use rate for employees and for residents. That is the average for existing city customers. So we're applying that to the mill site development. But if they are looking to achieve LEED certification, it's likely that their water use would be much less. And that might explain the discrepancy between what the water system plan uses as demand projections for the mill site versus what is in the PCI plan as their projections. The water system plan is, we use a number that's nearly twice of what is estimated for the PCI plan.
Okay, and you heard Mr. Hill's testimony or had a chance to watch the recording of his testimony?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and so if I can characterize it as he expressed concern about not identifying water sources for 2 and 3, because you might get to phases 2 and 3 and find that there isn't water supply. Is what you're saying here that when the details of 2 and 3 are known, if they can achieve LEED gold or platinum, that you could identify additional water in the form of savings from their proposal?
Objection leading.
Noted. I'm going to let her answer.
It is correct that, well, even through the development of the phase 1 project, water demands may be realized to be reduced. And then in the design of phases 2 and 3, it's possible that the development can reduce or design to have low water use on the site. There's examples of net zero water use in development projects. That's not what this development is going for, but it's possible.
So would additional detail about the proposed design, the actual proposed design of planning areas 2 and 3, enable you to make a determination at that time about adequate water supply?
That's correct. Kind of based on some preliminary calculations, if the numbers, the demand estimates that are presented in the PCI plan can be realized, those are lower numbers than what we applied for the water system plan. So if the PCI plan demands can be realized, then there would be adequate capacity to serve those phases 2 and 3 in the 20-year planning period. Okay,
thank you. Mr. Hill, I think, also made a comment about not having received the city's water system plan until very, very recently. Do you have any response to that?
Yes, we have we sent it, and I have confirmation of delivery from UPS, I believe it was, on December 13th, 2021. So it's been 114 days since his office has received that submittal.
Okay, and I'm going to screen share here again briefly, Ms. Examiner. And apologize, I went a little out of order, but showing the witness what is marked Exhibit C24. Again, this is a rebuttal exhibit in response to Mr. Hill's testimony. Is this the delivery receipt that you referenced?
That's correct.
So this is the receipt for delivery to King County of the 2021 City of Snoqualmie Water System Plan update.
That's correct.
All right, thank you. City moves admission of C24.
I'll inquire, Mr. Brickland.
We have no objection.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor, Ms. Kaler.
No objection.
All right, we'll admit C24.
All right, going on, Ms. Campbell, did you hear Mr. Hill outline concern for future water supply for King County residents?
Yes, I did.
And I believe he indicated there are some approximately 100 existing connections to City of Snoqualmie water customers who are in the unincorporated area. Does that match your understanding?
Approximately, we utilized a number of 430 residents and 1 employee But so it's in the ballpark, I would say.
So you utilize a resident number, they utilized a connection number. Is that a different metric?
It's a different metric, but we typically use a city planning document to convert a connection or a residential home to and estimate the number of people who live there.
Okay. Is there any reason that the city supplying water to the mill site would affect existing customers?
No. The city would only provide water service to the mill site if it wasn't going to impact existing customers.
Okay, and that's true of existing customers in the city, existing customers in the unincorporated area.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. There that are currently served in their water service area.
All right. Did you hear Mr. Hill also express concern about the city's ability to serve potential growth in customers in the unincorporated county area? And if so, do you have a response?
Yes, I did hear that. And we have emails from the King County demographer from July 2018, where he indicates that there is expectation of almost zero population growth in the unincorporated county area.
So you mentioned the county demographer. Why was RH2 in communicating with the county demographer in this context?
We were trying to estimate the number of future connections that could be expected outside of the city's planning area, but within the water service area for our future demand projections. Okay. So,
and the answer was almost zero?
It was specifically, he says, recent trends in extremely limited residential growth in these areas prior to point to expectation of almost zero population growth in the foreseeable future.
And did he explain why that was? Or did he just recent trends?
Right. He refers to the rural and low density characteristic of the territory immediately outside of the city limits of Snoqualmie.
Okay. And are you aware of any planned annexations to the city?
No.
Okay, and as part of forecasting demand, did you also coordinate with anyone on the city planning in the city planning department about what they might expect in terms of population growth or annexations or the like?
So yes, the city provided the expected population and employment growth in all of their planning areas within the city. So the population and employment projections that we utilized for the water system plan and the demand projections are based on numbers provided by the city. For the city, in the city, outside of the city, we relied on this information from the King County demographer.
Okay, and was anyone from the King County? We heard from Mr. Hill about the King County Utility Technical Review Committee. Was anyone associated with the UTRC, part of that communication between RH2 and the demographer?
Yes, in August of 2018, Steve Hershey, who was Jay Hill's predecessor as a UTRC chair, had reconfirmed the statements regarding the rural and low density characteristic of the territory immediately outside of the city limits, and that there was almost zero population growth in the foreseeable future. He referenced word for word and the date of the email, and Steve did in his email to RH2.
Okay, when you say reference word for word, you mean the word for word what the county demographer had said?
Correct.
Okay. So you're talking about the water system plan prior delivery to King County. Can you speak generally about where the city's water system plan update is in the process, both with respect to the state and King County?
The water system plan has been submitted to the Department of Health, and we have received comments from the Department of Health and the Department of Ecology on the water system plan. Those comments are relatively minor, and we had been waiting for King County comments to be received before we can address any other comments. So as I mentioned, King County comments were, or I'm sorry, the water system plan was transmitted to King County on December 13th, 2021, and we still have not received any comments from King County on the planning document.
Okay. And is there a time frame for Department of Health and Ecology and King County to review and decide on water system plans?
But Department of Health and the RCW sets forth that they have a 90-day review period that may be extended for an additional 90 days. They only taken the 90 days in this regard. The King County UTRC requires a 90-day review period, which they're outside of at this time.
Okay. And I think we've also heard some comments in this proceeding about, gee, if a document is not included in the FEIS, how would the city council as a decision maker ever become aware of it? Do you know whether the city council is aware of or has any role in the city's water system plan update?
Yeah, so the city council has, prior to submittal to review agencies of the water system plan, the city council was presented a draft of the water system plan and had approved the for submittal.
Examiner, I
One second.
object to this question and the answer. I mean, the issue isn't whether the city council is privy to this information in some other context. The issue is whether the environmental impact statement is adequate. The fact that this document may come to the city council in some other proceeding is totally irrelevant.
May I respond?
Yeah, you can.
Well, the argument about adequacy is whether the decision maker has enough information to make decisions on probable on a project. If the decision maker has information through other means as to the environmental impacts, there is less they need to see in the EIS. The EIS doesn't, as we've briefed, doesn't need to be a compendium of everything that's available. And in this case, both the draft and the final referred to the city's ongoing water system plan update process as informing the adequacy of supply for this particular project. So the council's participation in that process is totally relevant. And last but not least, and I haven't gotten to the document yet, but the council's participation is reflected in a resolution, which I plan to offer, but of course the examiner knows she can notice judicially anyway.
I believe Ms. Kaler would like to speak to this objection.
Thank you. Yes, I would. I think just generally, this is responsive testimony to Mr. Hill's testimony. And to the extent the testimony has been allowed in, the responding parties should be provided an opportunity to respond. I also think that generally the discussion of the measures that are being looked at in the water system plan is responsive directly to Mr. Hill's acknowledgement that water supply issues can be dealt with in an EIS or in another planning process. And fundamentally, it goes big picture to the issue of phasing that the appellants have raised. And the appellants seem to be arguing that all parallel processes, including water supply planning and cleanup under MOTCA, they all need to happen at the same time. right, in order for the EIS to be adequate. And our fundamental argument is that is not the case, that there are independent processes that, that bring with them additional information, and that they happen at different times, and that the EIS properly considers the information that's there, at that moment in time. That doesn't mean that considerations raised in the EIS might not be informed, at later dates by these ongoing processes. So generally, I think it's appropriate for the examiner to hear this information. It's responsive to the issues that opponents have raised.
I am persuaded, and I'll let the question be answered.
All right, I think I have to ask it again, probably.
Please.
I was asking Ms. Campbell whether she's aware of whether the city council has a role in the city's water system plan update process.
Yes, the city has had reviewed and approved the transmittal of the water system plan to review agencies. Once the review agency comments are received, and the plan will be updated by RH2 to address those review comments, and then the council is required to adopt the water system plan before the Department of Health can formally approve it.
Okay, and I'm going to screen share showing the witness copy of resolution 1593. You can see the top and the title, which I think reflects what you just said, but I will also scroll down and ask you to look at section 1. If you can read that below the now therefore in bold.
Now therefore be it hereby resolved.
I'm sorry, no, I didn't mean you have to read it out loud, but just directing your attention to that section 1. Is that the council's approval for submittal that you were just referring to?
Correct.
Okay. And my apologies, Ms. Examiner, I did not pre-mark this, but the city would offer resolution 1593 as exhibit C26.
I will inquire as to whether there are objections, starting with Mr. Rickland.
No. Same objection, but I don't need to belabor it.
Thank you. And Ms. Kaler, did you have any objection?
No objection.
All right. I'm going to admit C26 for the same reason I allowed the testimony. So. Thank you.
All right, and I just to sum up, I think, Ms. Campbell, you said this before, but just so that we understand where things are in the process, is you have collected comments from the Department of Health and Ecology, which you plan to incorporate in the final plan before, along with comments from King County. You plan to incorporate those in the revisions you talked about on chart 7-1, present those to the city council for final approval.
That's correct.
Okay. With that, Ms. Examiner, I don't have anything further for Ms. Campbell.
All right. And it would be time for cross-examination. We would go with appellant first.
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot, but a few things. Thank you, Ms. Campbell, for being here today. I'm Dave Brickland. I represent the appellant in this case. You may know that. You testified a lot about documents other than the environmental impact statement. It's not your opinion that any of the information you just referenced in these documents, the draft water system plan and others, the capital investigation project document you referenced, none of that information is in the environmental impact statement, is it?
The environmental impact statement references the water system planning documents and other water supply reports that have been prepared previously, which is why I was speaking to them.
Right, but some of the documents you were referencing are subsequent to the EIS. For instance, you talked about the new data regarding water demand in the community and the possibly water use efficiency savings that are resulting. That's not an environmental impact statement, is it?
Well, the environmental impact statement references the water system plan, which water system planning is always a living document. And there's where we don't ever stop planning. Things are always changing. And
I didn't ask that, Ms. Campbell. The document you referred to, the information you referred to, is not in the environmental impact statement, correct?
that's correct.
Thank you. Have you ever served as a SEPA responsible official yourself?
No,
You agree that the EIS states that there's not an adequate water supply for phases 2 and 3, right?
correct.
And you agree that the EIS says that deficiency is going to be addressed in future water system planning efforts, right?
The EIS references some options for addressing water supply planning improvements or water supply improvements, and that they would also be addressed in water system plan.
Right. So just to be clear that we're on the same page, the EIS doesn't actually include an analysis of those options, but rather says that that's something that's going to occur in the future water system planning arena, correct?
It references the previous water system plan, the currently adopted water system plan as having, and here the 2016 water system capacity analysis update as addressing those water supply issues. And it also references the water system plan that is currently being prepared as also continuing those discussions and evaluations for
Right.
supply.
So the plan that was in existence at the time of the EIS, the 2016 plan, that did not specify any specific option that would cure this deficit for phases 2 and 3, did it?
It did reference the some of the water rights changes that some that have been already implemented and some that are waiting for implementation.
Were you involved in preparing the final environmental impact statement responses to comments on the draft EIS?
No, I was not.
Have you reviewed the final environmental impact statements responses to comments?
I have.
For water supply?
Yes.
Did you review the King County comment letter on the drafting environmental impact statement related to water supply?
I did.
And were you aware that the county comment was in part that the EIS acknowledged a lack of water for phases 2 and 3, but county expressed concern that the solutions for that shortage had been deferred and were not addressed in the EIS. Do you recall that?
Yes, but I am not aware of any issues that bar the county from approving a water system plan due to that.
I'd move to strike the last part of the question, which was not responsive. My question was simply that whether the county had raised that issue in their comment letter, and you agreed with that, right?
Can you repeat the whole question, please?
Yes. Do you agree that the county, in their comment letter on the draft EIS, identified a concern that the draft EIS failed to address or identify the methods that would be employed to deal with the lack of water for phases 2 and 3? Did the county raise that in their comment letter?
I understand that the county raised that in their comment letter.
Right. is it your, do you agree that the final EIS response to comments did not address that concern that had been raised by the county?
I do not agree. I believe that the final EIS does address that concern.
And can you point that out to me where that occurs?
I'm looking at page 3-113 of the response to comments. And under the first sentence or the first paragraph in the response, it says the draft EIS evaluated water and wastewater supply and demand based on both the currently adopted utility plans and emerging updated plans. Regarding water supply, the Snoqualmie mill site is currently within the city's water service area. Its population and employment will be included in the water supply and the supply demand estimates in the updated plan.
So Ms. Klungen, can you bring up the King County draft EIS comment letter, please? Screen share. And go to page 3 of that document.
So is this the draft comment letter or is this S19? This is the
Well,
draft comment letter.
it's the comment letter on the draft EIS. It
Thank
was in the appendix of the final EIS.
Thank you.
Right.
Can
And
we have the page?
and we should be looking at page 3. And under water supply there. And if you go down to the last paragraph in that section, it says, the county is concerned about the resultant lack of supply, which will likely have a disproportionate impact on rural users and future connections in the unincorporated area. You see that?
Yes.
You see that sentence? And now when you go to now if we can switch to the final EIS response to that comment, can you point out to me where in the response that issue is even identified, that the county was concerned about the impact on rural users and future connections? Where was that issue even identified? And if it was identified, where is there a response to that?
I do not see a response in the county's comment was not applicable because there's no growth as indicated by the county in the unincorporated areas. So it is not applicable to this discussion here.
So that's your testimony today, right?
Yes.
But my question is whether the final environmental impact statement provided a response to that comment from the county, and you agree that the EIS did not. Isn't that right?
In referencing the water and the water supply and demand estimates of the mill site and the water system plans, the comment does address the the concern regarding service in the unincorporated area.
So your testimony a second ago was that the county's request for information about the disproportionate impact on rural users and future connections was a non-issue because there was no future demand out there. Where in the response to the comments in the final EIS is that stated?
There is not specific wording in this response to comments regarding a disproportionate impact in unincorporated areas.
Thank you. All right, that's all I have for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you. It is time for cross-exam by the applicant. Does the applicant have any cross-examination for this witness?
The applicant does not have any cross-examination for this witness.
Okay, thank you.
And-
Mr.
oh,
Sturbank, oh,
actually, on that issue, I just wanted, regarding sequencing, by the way,
yeah,
I just wanted, it didn't really matter here because the applicant didn't have any testimony, any examination. But it seems to me that the city and the applicant are obviously very closely aligned, and that those two should do their questioning first before we do our
that's
cross-examination.
fine. That makes sense. We'll do that. I've just been going in the same
Yeah.
order every time and we can change it. That's fine.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem. Mr. Sturbank, did you have a redirect for this witness?
Just a couple questions, Ms. Examiner. Sorry, I was trying to make sure that my microphone was on. Ms. Campbell, Mr. Bricklin was asking you some questions about I think the draft EIS identification of options, and he asked you about whether the reference in the draft to the 2016 plan, but that didn't identify an option to cure water shortage. Can you tickle, well, let me just ask a question, we can refer to the page. Was the Aquifer Storage and Recovery, the ASR project, was that mentioned in the DEIS?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and that's the same ASR project that's discussed in the 2021 water system plan update?
Correct.
And that you mentioned, for which the city's received a grant from the Department of Ecology that it's pursuing?
That's correct.
Okay, and so that's in addition to, and that is specifically an option to address future water supply needs for planning areas 2 and 3 of the mill site project?
One of several, yes.
Okay, and that is mentioned in the DEIS?
That is mentioned in the DEIS.
Okay. I think that we are done, Ms. Examiner.
Okay. First,
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell.
yeah, first I want to thank Ms. Campbell for her testimony. Next, I want to address the fact that we have 1, 2, 3 new exhibits that I don't have. So I want to make sure that the city causes exhibits C24, C25, and C26 to be sent to both to me and also, of course, to counsel for applicant and appellant.
Thank you for making that request.
Of course.
I will do so forthwith.
Thank you.
And I'd also alert the parties that while we did not object to these late exhibits, we're certainly reserving our right in the future to object to late filed exhibits, and we can save for that time if it arises.
Sure.
That.
Definitely. I definitely expect them. All right. I think we are complete with Ms. Campbell, and I think Mr. Sturbank would tell you that you're excused, but you can, of course, stick around if you're enjoying the show.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
So at that point, I think it's time for the next applicant witness.
Yes, Ms. Examiner, I think it is. And I will say that we are going at a speedier clip here than I had anticipated.
Okay.
I was not sure we would get to this witness that we just had today. So if I could have a 5-minute break
Sure.
to confer with folks about the order of witnesses,
Yeah.
I would appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
let's.
Could we
Yes.
get a heads up on maybe who it might be, just
Yep.
so that we could line up our experts who would be responsive?
It would potentially be Richard Wyman, although I need to confer with Mr. Sturbank. He may have another witness who wants to go. So that would be the person who it may be from my end.
Thank you.
Okay. So 5 minutes, we'll say 4:45. We'll be back on the record at 4:45.
Great. Thank you.
Is the applicant. Thank you for starting the recording. Is the applicant ready?
The applicant is ready.
Great.
And our next witness, as mentioned before, will be Richard Wyman.
Great.
And while we wait for Mr. Wyman to come on, could I ask the city council to please get us those exhibits that were just introduced? Appreciate getting those post haste.
Great. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Sir, can we please have you introduce yourself for the record by stating and spelling your name, giving us the title by which I should identify you in the findings, and then allow me to swear you in.
Yes, my name is Richard Weinman, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, W-E-I-N-M-A-N. You may address me as Mr. Weinman or anything else you like.
Your relationship to the case?
Oh, I am the preparer of the lead consultant for the draft for the environmental impact statement.
Thank you very much. And then if I could please administer the oath, do you swear or affirm your testimony will be true? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kaler, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Wyman.
Good afternoon, Ms. Keller.
Please ask you to briefly summarize your qualifications.
Yes, I am a land use and environmental consultant. I've been working in that capacity for 43 years. My work is focused on different types of land use analyses, some policy planning, development regulations, but most of my practice is focused on various forms of SEPA compliance and SEPA documents, particularly environmental impact statements. I do peer review of EISs. I actually am working currently as a responsible official in one jurisdiction. I've done that in the past. And I've been concentrating on SEPA since the, I guess, the mid-1980s.
And can you describe your experience generally with environmental impact statements for master plan projects?
Yes, I've done approximately 40 EISs on various types of master plans. I mean, those include just straight development projects, in some cases, sub-area plans with a development component, in some cases, more programmatic master plans, in some cases, project specific. My EIS work in general covers a pretty broad gamut. Worked on just about every type of development project. My work has been pretty evenly divided between public sector, private sector projects, mostly fairly large projects, but some small ones as well. I do have prior experience in the city of Snoqualmie, including Snoqualmie Ridge, which was actually a combined project, non-project EIS. It included the master plan for Snoqualmie Ridge, and a project proposal for Snoqualmie Parkway. So that aspect of this project is not unique to me either.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and show you the document that has been identified as Exhibit M1. Can you tell me what this is?
That is my resume.
Thank you. I'd like to ask for the admission of Exhibit M1.
Let me just inquire, is there any objection by the other attorneys to the admission of the resume?
No objection from the city.
Appellants may be conferring about other exhibits. I will assume no objection to a resume and I will admit it.
Thank you. And Mr. Wyman, can you, you did already a little bit in response to the examiner's question, but can you describe your role with regard to the EIS that brings us all here today?
Yes, so I was the lead consultant managing a team of approximately 12 professional consultants and firms dealing with the various disciplines required. I wrote some parts of it. I edited the entire document, coordinated with closely with the city and with their peer review team. The city's peer review team was approximately as large as the consultant team preparing the document.
Thank you. And Mr. Wyman, as I'm asking you this next question and subsequent questions, I just want to be clear, I'm not asking for a legal opinion, but I am asking for your opinion based on your 40-some years of experience with environmental review. Did you hear the testimony earlier today of Mr. Derdowski?
Yes, I did.
And did you hear his testimony and the testimony of some other witnesses from appellants that the EIS's use of phased review was improper?
I did.
And can you respond?
Yes, I disagree with those statements. Phased review is very commonly used for master plans because master plans are not planned all at once. They tend to be conceptual. And until an applicant has some indication that it is likely to receive general land use approval for the entire site or the entire project, they're not going to make the substantial investment in doing detailed engineering. So master plans tend to progress one portion of a site at a time. The SEPA rules, and I'm speaking as a consultant, the SEPA rules allow phased review in situations where the sequence of events goes from general to specific. When you begin environmental review at a stage of a proposal that is still developing, still being planned, but has not been totally planned. So phased review allows you to evaluate the project at whatever level of information is available at a given time, with the understanding that there will be additional environmental review in the future as other phases, aspects of the project are planned in greater detail. That's exactly what was done for the PCI plan. The EIS looks at the entire master plan as a whole. It evaluates the parts of the master plan that have been planned in greater detail at a greater level of detail, project-specific level of detail, and it evaluates subsequent phases, in this case, planning areas 2 and 3, commensurate with the level of information that's available for it. There is not much information available for planning areas 2 and 3 at this point, other than the idea of land uses that are desired and proposed. There's no building layout, no footprints to evaluate. So it's really not engineering level analysis. Detailed design analysis is just not possible. But the EIS does evaluate the entire project based on the information that's available. And based on my experience and practice, that's what phased review does.
Thank you. Relating to the phasing of the project, did you hear the testimony of Mr. Derdowski that a change in the sequencing of the phases would affect the validity of the analysis in the EIS? And I'll just preface this question or add to this question saying I understand that's not something that is proposed here. It was this kind of hypothetical situation posited by Mr. Derdowski, so I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
I don't see how that would make any difference, given that the EIS evaluates the entire project and the first phase, near-term phase of the project. I mean, we don't know that much about planning areas 2 and 3 right now. I mean, there is a general timetable for subsequent planning, set forth, but there is no detailed proposal. Plus the EIS states that there will be subsequent environmental review as planning progresses, and different parts of the proposal are ready for review. So I'm not sure what difference it would make if phase 3 came before phase 2. Each one of those is an increment of development. I mean, we know pretty much that either one of those phases is going to, trigger a number of requirements for improvements. It doesn't really matter which one goes first. So I don't see how that would really make any difference.
Thank you. Mr. Derdowski also testified, did you hear his testimony, that the EIS relies on a future development agreement for environmental analysis? And hopefully I'm not mischaracterizing that. That's what I heard. Did you hear that testimony?
I did hear that. I didn't really understand where that was going. I don't see how the development agreement would affect the environmental analysis that's already occurred. I mean, Mr. Derdowski seemed to be assuming that the development agreement would change the project in some way. And based on my experience, that's not what development agreements do. I mean, they are based on the environmental review to large extent. So, I don't agree with that. I don't see that as occurring.
Thank you. So turning to, again, another statement by Mr. Derdowski and I think some others during the course of appellant's testimony, including Ms. Linney. Did you hear the testimony that the EIS doesn't adequately address compatibility with surrounding uses?
I did.
And can you respond to that?
Yes. So first of all, that issue is discussed in the EIS. It's at pages 3-158 through 3-160 in the draft EIS, and in the responses in 3.7 in the final EIS.
And if at any point you'd like me to call up an exhibit, just let me know.
Sure. So, stepping back, I think it's useful to recall that the PCI plan is redevelopment of an industrial site that operated for 100 years. It was, in fact, the original town of Snoqualmie, and contained a mix of uses. It had housing, it had schools, it had a post office, it had a hospital. It had a railroad depot. It was a town built around an intensive industrial development. The site was zoned industrial by King County prior to annexation, and by the city, a commercial industrial by the city following annexation. It's within the urban growth area. It does, however, border the rural area. So any analysis of land use and compatibility, I think, needs to occur within that historic land use context. And it's within that context that any conflict in land uses would occur. So land uses immediately adjacent and surrounding the site are a combination of open space, mining, rural residential development, and actually some urban reserve to the north, city utilities to the west, currently dirtfish and rural residential uses to the east, and those are separated by 396th Avenue, and then downtown Snoqualmie to the south. The open space to the north and to the east is now owned by King County, and the planned missing link to the Snoqualmie Valley Trail is going to be located somewhere within that open space, although the alignment has not been determined yet. So the draft EIS in the sections that I refer to acknowledges that the PCI plan would intensively develop the site for the mix of uses that it is zoned for, and that it basically has been zoned for and used for. The uses will, change in appearance, in location, but they're very similar to the range of uses in terms of, uses per se that have occurred on the site and in the area for 100 years. So yes, there will be contrasts between what is developed on the site and what is existing and planned for the area, to the north, in particular. But the fact that there are contrasts in the intensity of use does not automatically mean that there will be conflicts, because those conflicts can be created. It's not just a result of a difference in the intensity of the use, something big next to something small. It depends on, what those uses are doing and, kind of what the, byproducts of that use are in terms of noise, lighting, visibility, things like that. So it's not just the difference in intensity. So there would not be any noise impacts based on the analysis in the EIS. The site would only be visible, at all, even partially, at ground level from relatively few locations, including, from the north. So the site will be surrounded by fairly dense perimeter vegetation around the perimeter. Part of the proposal includes a 35-acre open space conservation easement that will protect that site from development. So the site is fairly well, it provides a fairly substantial buffer from adjacent uses, and impacts would not spill over for the most part into the adjacent areas. If Mr. Dudowski is saying, or if there's a sense that just someone knowing that development is there, I can't argue with that. But they're not going to be very aware of it, other than maybe in their consciousness. But if you can't see it, if you can't hear it, if you can't smell it, I think those are the kinds of things that an environmental impact statement can get at. Perceptions are difficult to deal with. So, I think in summary, the EIS addresses the issue specifically. It addresses the issues that are involved with determining whether or not uses are in conflict or compatible. So, one can draw, the examiner can draw her own conclusion about whether or not there's a conflict or they are compatible.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up. There were a couple particular statements that Mr. Dudowski made regarding that land use compatibility you just discussed, and I wanted to follow up on those two. First, I heard him say that there was no analysis of planning areas 2 and 3 with regard to land use compatibility. Did you hear that?
I did hear that. Yeah, and that's not accurate either. The parks, I'll just call out the parks chapter, which is 3.13, and aesthetics, which is 3.9, both specifically address potential, impacts to views for recreators along that link of the Snoqualmie Valley Trail. When it's constructed, it acknowledges that, depending on how planning area 3 is planned, what kinds of landscaping and vegetation is provided. There's not much there now, but depending on what kind of perimeter landscaping is provided and other mitigation occurs, and how buildings are located on the site, there may be views into the site, and can't determine the extent of that at this point, just based on the level of planning of the site and of the trail. But the EIS clearly identifies those as potential impacts. So I think the statement is inaccurate.
Thank you. And related, another specific item relating to this topic is, did you hear Mr. Dudowski say that in terms of land use compatibility, the EIS only looks at the immediately surrounding area as opposed to considering compatibility impacts on a broader scale?
Yes, I should have mentioned in describing my experience. Land use has been one of my areas of concentration throughout my consulting experience, and land use and consistency with plans, policy, regulations are usually the two sections of an EIS that I do just to make sure that I keep my my fingers and my head in the substantive part of the document and don't just try to herd cats. Yes, I did hear him say that, and that's not accurate. It does address indirect impacts, and it's at pages 3-160, 3-161 in the draft EIS, and it was not commented on in the final EIS, so there's no response. The question of growth inducement, I think.
I'm just going to stop you here for a minute. Just I think that's another sort of indirect indirect impact.
Okay.
But just again, regarding land use compatibility impacts to the surrounding area, for example,
The large area.
You just mentioned the view impact analysis in response to the prior question. Is that one of the types of analyses that considers a broader area?
Yes, views do. The parks analysis does. Transportation does. You think of one else. Public services. It looks at the entire city, population, employment, to most of the built environment.
Mr. Durdowski's testimony that the EIS didn't adequately address the indirect impacts, or I guess you could characterize it as growth inducement of the project.
I did.
And again, can you respond?
Yes, I don't agree that it did not. I think certainly I'd agree that the focus is on the area surrounding the site, and I think that is appropriate. I think Mr. Durdowski was speculating quite a bit about the extent of the impact that this project would have on the entire Snoqualmie Valley, I think is where he was headed. I think, first of all, he was saying we should have evaluated the potential for rezones of properties around the site, and evaluated what that could have meant in terms of compatibility. And I think that kind of speculation is totally inappropriate in an EIS. Looking at the broader question, he seemed to be creating a disaster scenario for how this particular development was going to have a domino effect on development throughout the valley. My approach, my conclusion, my belief is that jurisdictions will follow they will follow the law. They will follow the Growth Management Act. They will abide by the drawing of the urban-rural line. in King County, that urban uses will occur in the urban area, and that they will implement their plans. And King County will implement its plan to limit the rural area to rural uses. I mean, he seemed to be, saying that, you can't trust politicians to do what they're supposed to do. And, that's an area and type of speculation that are certainly not appropriate for an EIS to jump into. So I guess that's a long way of saying that, I guess the EIS doesn't get into that. I mean, it does say specifically that, we assume that jurisdictions are going to implement applicable plan and zoning designations, and that those kinds of indirect impacts are not going to occur. And I think that's a reasonable assumption.
And so just to be clear, the EIS does identify that theoretically there could be some growth pressure, but that the jurisdiction's land use plans would mitigate that. Is that?
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Objection leading. Can we have the witness testify, please?
Yes,
Yes, we will have the witness testify.
Sorry. The reference that I made to the statement in that section of the draft EIS that discusses indirect impacts places the response that I just gave in the context of development having the potential to create pressure and act as a precedent for spin-off development. So this is a response, and a limitation to that occurring.
Thank you. Kind of going down my list here on Mr. Derdowski's testimony. Did you hear Mr. Derdowski's testimony that the EIS did not adequately address the uses that are allowed under the city's shoreline master program on the project site?
Yes, I think he may have missed that section of the draft EIS. It's actually in both the draft and the final. Let me find that. I don't have the page reference, but it's definitely the draft EIS evaluated the then current draft shoreline master program in terms of the shoreline designations applicable to the portion of the site that's within the shoreline and for the uses that would occur within shoreline jurisdiction, and concluded that they were all consistent. The final EIS updated that in section 3.8 and looked again at the adopted shoreline master program, identified that it had not changed substantially, had not changed at all in regard to shoreline environment designations, and that the proposal was still consistent. I mean, Mr. Derdowski may have been under the impression, well, I won't speculate as to what he was thinking, but the analysis is clearly there.
Thank you. Did you hear Mr. Derdowski's testimony regarding growth forecasts, and that the EIS did not adequately address those growth forecasts or the jobs housing balance?
Yes, it did address both of those. Let's see. Second, let's see this.
And apologies, I know it's a big document, and I don't have a page number reference for you, but we'll give you a minute here to find it.
I thought I wrote it down. I have to jump to the document for a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I can give you the I can give you the sections unless you want the page number.
I think the sections will work well for
Okay.
us.
Draft EIS 3.8 discusses population, employment, and housing. Okay, here, let's see, jobs, housing balance is on page 3-200. It actually shows that the proposal would improve the city's jobs housing balance. By improve, meaning there would be more jobs relative to housing. Right now, I think that it's, if I recall, its ratio is 0.76, and that it is projected to increase in 2032 based on forecasts, targets. It was projected to improve to 0.96. And then with the PCI plan, the ratio would be 1.36. So the higher the ratio means the more jobs there are relative to population, the more opportunity there is for people to live closer to work, for it to be a balanced community, for there to be less commuting. And then the section also evaluates population and employment, and it does identify the situation regarding the PCI plan and the difference in the projections that were originally made for the site in the comprehensive plan, and then the difference between those which were made without knowledge of the PCI application. The difference between that and what the PCI plan actually proposes. It does disclose that both for population and employment, the project would be above the city's targets, since technically it was not included within the projections. Although it could be, the population is fairly small. It's only 304 people at build out. So even if it was completely developed by 2032, it would not have much of an impact on the population target. I think this is where the comment about caps, population caps, and how targets are intended to be used, came in. And my understanding and experience based on growth management hearings boards decisions that I'm familiar with is that that's exactly what they've said, that targets are a minimum and are not a maximum. So in terms of employment, it would be a good step above the current target, which I guess creates a misalignment that would have between plan and project that would have to be adjusted in the city's next update of its comp plan. But on balance, definitely creates some issues in terms of employment and impacts that are associated with that, like traffic, and those are addressed in the EIS. Also a positive impact associated with jobs and tax revenues, which is addressed in other sections of the EIS.
Thank you. And I think we heard the beginning of a discussion on Cross earlier about updates to those targets. I guess I'll ask you, is that within your personal knowledge? Anything about updates to the recent updates to those targets?
I know that those are done periodically. I was not aware. I mean, that was adopted, I believe, after the draft EIS had been published. I mean, I knew something was going on, but I don't know that it would have made any difference to the analysis because this project is still, not within, those targets. I mean, my understanding is that there has been an ongoing, discontinuity between or conversation between the city, and the GMPC and PSRC in particular about forecasting for the city. That the city does not believe that they're accurate in terms of city forecasts, but that's kind of a side issue. So I'm not sure that knowledge of those forecasts would have made any difference.
Thank you. Got a couple more questions about Mr. Dragowski's testimony here. Did you hear his testimony that the EIS did not adequately address the deviations that were requested in the PCI plan application?
I did, yes.
And can you respond?
Yeah, that's not accurate either. The proposal includes the deviations. I mean, the deviations are basically to permit those aspects of the proposal, such as increases in height, allowance of residential uses without a conditional use permit. I mean, those are, permitting issues. The proposal included those elements that are applied for in the deviations. So, the analysis, for example, includes the residential use, since it doesn't matter how you get there. I mean, it's proposed. It assumes that the buildings would be the same height that are applied for in the deviation. The wetland analysis, assumes that those differences in how wetland buffers are treated, would occur. So the impacts of all of those deviations are considered as parts of the proposed project that are described in the project description and evaluated throughout the EIS.
Thank you. Did you hear Mr. Dragowski's testimony that the EIS didn't adequately address the project because the PCI plan application was updated 2 weeks ago?
I did hear that. I'm not exactly sure what he was referring to. I mean, the substantive change in the application, as far as I'm aware, was the deviations and providing justification for the requested deviations. So it's sort of the same issue as he's raising regarding the deviations. I'm not aware of any other substantive changes that would have required different environmental analysis.
And so just to be clear, you're not saying the deviations were proposed for the first time 2 weeks ago?
No,
Just
they
that
were
it was-
built, they were built into the project that is evaluated in the draft EIS. They were included as deviations in the application for the first time a few weeks ago, but they've been evaluated as parts of the project throughout the environmental review process.
Okay. And I'll just note that the specific content of the changes is reflected in the exhibits that the examiner has, which I'm not going to pull up in interests of time. Just a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
I believe there were various witnesses. I probably couldn't name them specifically, who made comments about a lack of response to their comment or to somebody's comment in the final EIS. Does a final EIS need to respond individually to each comment that was made?
No, it does not. I mean, you're allowed to.
Objection, it's a legal issue.
Okay.
But
And so-
I would stipulate, counsel, though, that the, multiple commenters who raised the same issue, that can be lumped together. We don't have an objection with that.
Thank
If
you.
that's what you were trying to establish.
Thank you.
So you're objecting to the extent that it calls for a legal conclusion?
True, but I'm also stipulating to a legal conclusion, but just trying to avoid going beyond that simple issue.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bricklin. And so then generally overall, Mr. Wyman, having heard the testimony of the appellant's witnesses, does anything that you have heard change your opinion about the adequacy of the EIS?
No, it did not.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions for this witness.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kaler. Per our discussion before this witness, I will hear cross-examination by the city first.
Thank you, Ms. Examiner. Good afternoon, Mr. Wyman. Just a couple questions for you, and I apologize if I missed it, since I was trying to get Mr. Bricklin and the examiner exhibits during the first part of your testimony. But when you were talking about other land uses in the vicinity and pipeline projects and so on, as you were talking about responding to Mr. Derdowski's testimony, do you recall the conversation that I had with Mr. Derdowski about the status of Snoqualmie Ridge build out?
I think I remember you asking him if he was aware of it.
Right, I did, and he asked me. So I guess I would ask you the same question. Are you generally aware of the status of the ridge build out?
Generally, I mean, I do, not in terms of specific numbers. I mean, I do drive through there and see what areas are developed and are not. And I did work on the environmental impact statement for Snoqualmie Ridge 1. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So in preparation of the mill site EIS, did you consider that there was a large amount generally of potential additional Snoqualmie Ridge build out coming, or that it's mostly done and that there'd be very little additional growth impacts to consider along with the mill site, or how was that addressed in the EIS?
Yeah, the approved but undeveloped, portions would have been considered as pipeline projects and included in that category. That was considered in the EIS.
Okay, and since you just mentioned a couple of EISs, you mean it was considered in the mill site EIS?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Kaler was talking to you a little bit about the portion of the EIS that that was addressing the potential for a project to catalyze growth, but I think you said there's an assumption that jurisdictions will follow their own codes and so on. Mr. Durdowski had a different opinion about that. Are you aware of whether the King County countywide planning policies place any limitations on the ability of the UGA boundary to be changed, for instance?
Oh, yes, certainly does. Very, very difficult if, not, well, I guess nothing's impossible, but very, very difficult to move the line. I mean, that was the intent. I mean, that's the intent. That was the intent of King County prior to GMA. That's certainly the intent of Growth Management Act.
Okay. Does the city of Snoqualmie, for instance, have the ability in response to if neighboring landowners said, well, the mill site developed, but I'm in the county and I'd like to move the UGA boundary. Can the city move the UGA boundary and annex additional lands?
No, there's a lengthy complex process. I mean, I think it would first need to be considered in a potential or future UGA and evaluated before it could be considered.
And that's a decision for the county and not the city.
That's exactly, yes.
Okay. And then you were speaking a little bit about jobs housing balance, and I recall Mr. Durdowski's comments as seeming, at least to me, to indicate that he was looking for jobs housing balance within the mill site itself. Is that the context in which the jobs housing balance discussion in the EIS occurred, or is it applied more broadly?
No, it's a citywide ratio. I mean, it doesn't make any. The goal of the ratio, the reason you consider the ratio, is to see how balanced a city is in terms of jobs and housing, because of the implications of that, for commuting, for where money is spent, tax revenue generation, those kinds of things. It makes sense for a city to be looking at that kind of ratio. It doesn't make sense for an industrial project to be looking at this. I mean, this is not intended, to be a balanced project in that sense. It is primarily commercial and industrial. That's the way that it's, been planned and zoned, for over a decade.
So is it fair to understand it as not being balanced internally within the project, but adding to the city's overall jobs housing balance?
That's a good way of describing it.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any further questions for this witness.
Great. Then we can move to cross-examination by counsel for appellants.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Wyman, nice to see you again.
Mr. Brecklin, always a pleasure.
You agreed with a statement made by counsel that there is the prospect for future environmental review in subsequent permitting decisions. Do you recall that?
I do.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that there will be an environmental impact statement, right? Future environmental review can also just be a DNS or an MDNS.
The city would make the determination based on an application. Yes.
Right.
I mean, it can be, there's a whole range of documents.
Right. So to the extent that there's a suggestion that any issues that are to be addressed in an EIS will necessarily be covered in a later EIS, your statement that there'll be future environmental review is not a statement that there's going to be a future EIS, right?
No, I can't determine, I'm not the city's responsible official. I don't know what the next application is going to contain. So I can't determine now what the appropriate environmental document would be.
And you mentioned that phasing is commonly used, but you also know that phasing cannot be used to avoid a discussion of cumulative effects, right?
Certainly, yes.
Let's talk about compatibility for a moment. You mentioned that the EIS talks about impacts on the surrounding area and a number of individual sections. You know, the traffic section talks about traffic impacts beyond the site boundaries, and visual impacts are discussed beyond the site boundaries, and so forth. But you recognize too, don't you, that in terms of compatibility impacts and impacts on surrounding areas, it's really the combination of multiple effects that are the accumulation and have to be addressed in an EIS. True?
It needs to include a look at cumulative impacts, yes.
Right. And there is no place where the cumulative impacts of, you know, the accumulation of the traffic impacts, utility changes, visual impacts, there's no place where the EIS pulls all that together and looks at that as a single cumulative effect on those surrounding areas, does it?
No, that's more appropriate for a decision maker to do that kind of balancing and create that kind of comprehensive, picture in one's head. I mean, I'd say the environmental impact statement kind of paints the overall picture, and then the decision maker looks at it and decides what they see.
But I thought I heard you say two different things. I thought you first agreed that the EIS did not paint the overall picture, but rather looked at each of these elements just individually: traffic impacts, utility impacts,
Yeah, that's
visual impacts, right?
that is what I said.
Right. And there is no place where the EIS looked at those impacts cumulatively and what effect the accumulation of those impacts would have on the surrounding area. Do you agree with that too, right?
I agree with that, and I've never seen that
Right.
done.
And then you also talked about the deviation issue, and you said that there was an analysis in the EIS of the impacts that would occur if the deviations are included in this proposal. To assess what the impact of approving those deviations would be, you would need to also have an analysis of the impacts that would occur if the deviations were not approved, right? In other words, you can't tell what the impacts of the deviations would be if you don't also have the baseline of what would be the impacts if there were no deviations.
Well, let's use building height as an example. You can see what the impact of a 70-foot building is. So you can, from that, you can also envision what the impact of a 50-foot building would be.
But the EIS didn't do that, right? The EIS did not do an analysis of this development if there are no deviations and contrast that with the impacts if the deviations are included, right?
No, it looked at the proposal. The proposal included the deviations. It did not look at a different proposal.
That's all I have for this witness. Thank you.
All right, is there any redirect?
Well, I wasn't expecting to get this witness back quite so quickly. I do have just a couple minor items. First, Mr. Brooklyn asked you some questions regarding whether the document looks at the effects I'm sorry, I'm trying to read my own handwriting, looks cumulatively, I think, at all of the effects together when discussing compatibility, and you said, I've never seen that. Can you elaborate on never having seen what you meant by I've never seen that?
Well, let me make sure my interpretation of what Mr. Brickland was asking me is, do you step back, weigh, all these individual impacts and say, this is good, this is bad, this is what's going to happen when you look at all these things together. And my response was, that's not a judgment that's appropriate for an EIS to make. That's not the judgment that an EIS is asked to make. It's asked to look at individual elements of the environment and to determine what's going to occur. And it's for, the decision maker, be it the hearing examiner, a planning commission, or a city council, to take that information. I mean, that's the purpose of the EIS, is to provide this information to decision makers for them to make that decision, not for, an EIS consultant, to tell the city whether it's good or bad. I mean, the EIS tells them what's going to happen if they follow this course of action. It's for them to determine whether they like it or not, or it's consistent with their plans and policies and regulations, or not.
Okay, and more specifically, the format of this EIS that addresses each element of the environment individually, is that a standard practice for EISs?
Yes, that's required format for an EIS.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Brickland asked you if what I interpret is if the EIS looked at an alternative for the project with the deviations and an alternative for the project without the deviations. In your view, well, actually, I'm going to strike that. No further questions.
Okay. All right. Are we complete with the witness?
We are.
Great. Thank you for confirming. Mr. Wyman, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda, it's 5:50. Are we starting a new witness tonight, or are we done for the day?
So I believe we are done for the day. I think though we should have a scheduling discussion about
Let's do.
tomorrow and moving forward, because I know we do, I think I mentioned a couple days ago, that we had some witnesses with scheduling availability issues, and I wasn't sure if we were going to have to discuss them, but we may. And then I know we had some discussion already about Mr. Seidel's motion hearing tomorrow, and that affected the timing of our transportation witnesses. So I just want to be sure that we are all lined up for what we need to be lined up for in terms of our various availabilities.
Great.
So we have two, most likely, possibly a third witness for a very short amount of time, but at this point, I anticipate only 2 additional witnesses, unless something comes up in cross-examination. But at this point, I just anticipate only 2 additional witnesses. And those are Jeff Schramm, our transportation witness, and Cliff Schmidt, who will talk about contamination. Mr. Schmidt is one of the witnesses that has scheduling concerns. He is not available tomorrow. He is available first thing on Friday. And I think we'd had some discussion with appellants previously that our contamination witness was not available on Thursday. So those are our two remaining witnesses.
Right.
And I guess I'll hand it over to the city.
Well, and just to finish that thought, Mr. Seidels can't be available until after 11:30 for traffic. So that leaves us before 11:30 without witness testimony, unless we call people out of order. Correct.
Or we get the
That's
city on,
correct.
I'm sorry.
or the city.
That's what I meant. I meant we'll go to the city's
Oh.
witnesses next. Yes. So I'm assuming that's what we're going to hear from Mr. Sturbank.
Yes, the city anticipates 2 additional witnesses, possibly 3, but we're going to try to keep it to 2, which would be Mark Johnson and then Chris Breland, who is also on traffic. And so if we're protecting Mr. Seidel's schedule, then that would be tomorrow afternoon.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson could potentially go in the morning.
All right. Let's just get a ballpark. How long do you believe Mr. Johnson's testimony, direct testimony, will take?
I would say, to be conservative, 45 minutes, probably less.
Okay. If we start Mr. Johnson at 9 and we go 45 minutes on direct, and then we have cross, we will most likely definitely finish before 11:30.
Can I check with Ms. Klungen?
Yes, yes.
Is Mr. Seidels not available at all till 11:30, or was he available early, if I remember right, or and then he had a block when he was not available?
Yeah, he might be available earlier, but it was an oral argument, I think, at 10. So he wanted to give time. Yeah.
So if, given that we might have a gap, otherwise, I don't know. I have 2 thoughts. One, we could just not start at 9. We could give ourselves a break and start at 10 and probably then roll through. Or if we wanted to start at 9, maybe take one of those transportation witnesses from 9 to 10 and then switch to Mr. Johnson when at 10 o'clock.
And additionally, if the city were to call a 3rd witness, it would be relatively short and might be some testimony from Mr. Rogers.
So I want whatever works best for everybody's schedule, and I can't control that. So I'm open to suggestions. I'm happy to hear brief testimony in the morning. I think that's a good use of our time rather than ending up going later on Friday or 6th day. It would be better to use the time if we could. Please, somebody throw me a proposal.
So I would say one of those transportation witnesses then at 9.
And are we confirmed that Mr. Seidels can be here from 9 to 10?
I'm gonna need to check that, and we don't know how long their testimony is gonna be.
Can he be
I'm
texted
pretty
or
sure
called
that's
right this second?
Grab them. Hold on. Dave, you want it?
I got him.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alex, we're doing scheduling. You might want to hop on, but you could also just tell me, are you available tomorrow morning from 9 to 10?
And Mr. Brickland, perhaps we could start earlier even. Perhaps we could start at 8 and then get done with a witness before.
Yeah, he's
Mr.
going to jump
Seidels-
on. He has,
Okay, great.
yeah, I think that might be a good idea. That would give us a larger block.
It does.
And also, I was going to inquire if perhaps Ms. Klungen or Mr. Brickland could give us some idea of number of witnesses expected for rebuttal and time.
I don't think we have a firm idea on that, but we're certainly going to be conservative. We're not going to, it's not going to be a lengthy rebuttal.
So ballpark, total time, ballpark.
And topics that also, since we are
Right.
trying to coordinate our witnesses as well to listen as I know they've tried to do when we're putting witnesses on,
Yes.
so it would help to know.
I think it could be, I think you need to plan on any topic, but they would be very short. A lot of them are going to be pretty short.
So I guess the other potential idea, and this may be introducing too many moving pieces, but if we are able to get, traffic in before 10, and then we have Mark Johnson, and then we have a gap, we could, for example, I'm thinking if there's a witness who you're intending to put on for rebuttal that is not related to traffic or contamination, right? Our witnesses, we only have traffic and contamination left. So if you have,
And Mr. Vreeland's traffic, is that right?
Yes,
And Mr. Settles, are you on now? And you're available as of 1 o'clock or whatever, then, is that right?
I don't see him.
oh, I
In any
think,
event, I'm pretty sure he is. So my thought would be, instead of getting it that jumbled, would be, let's do the traffic starting at 8 till about 10. I think Mr. Settles is available till 10. And then that's 2 hours. And then we can switch to
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Johnson, right, to take up the rest of the morning. And then in the afternoon, we can come back to the traffic witnesses.
So, Mr. Seidels, we're now proposing traffic testimony from 8 to 10. Can you
Okay,
accommodate
so-
that?
Yeah, I would want my traffic witness to be present for that. I'll,
So-
and the other scary part about that is I have oral argument in a Superior Court case beginning at 10:30. So
Right.
unlike this morning when I had a little bit of flexibility on timing, that one,
Understood.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, but we could make it a hard stop at 10.
Yes, and we will. We'll make it a hard stop at 10 because
Okay.
you need time to change your gears. We'll just
Yeah,
stop and pick back up when all are available. So I
Okay.
guess, do we need to confirm Mr. Norris is available?
Let me call him right now. Let me mute myself and I'll call him.
Any other
and here's
considerations?
Mr. Cartman, who's been waiting to be admitted.
Thank you.
It's his traffic witness.
Thank
we're
you.
discussing, so he'll get us all in here to talk about scheduling.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize we had excluded you.
You had not. I asked to be demoted earlier so
I
as
see.
to make sure I would not interrupt, and I appreciate the rapid response to my request to return my
Yeah,
status.
and I just want to thank the city because I feel like the entire Zoom workings has been going very smoothly. So thank you for that.
Very
Absolutely.
impressive. While we have a moment, while we're waiting for that, may I ask, there was reference, Ms. Campbell, when she was testifying, referred to emails she had received from somebody at the county demographer. I wasn't tracking that well enough, and I thought those were made exhibits and discovered after the fact that they weren't.
Yeah.
Could
they're
I?
offered.
Could we, yeah, I understand. Could we obtain a copy of those so we understand what we're responding to in that regard?
All right, my traffic
Hold on,
witness is,
One second.
Mr. Saddles, just 1 second.
we didn't offer exhibits as examiner.
I understand that.
It seems like we're getting, and the appellants have county witnesses. They can ask and Mr. Brickland just said he was planning to.
So you're not.
We should expect all witnesses. I'm not in a position where I sit here to provide anything to Mr. Brickland. I've been dealing with a witness schedule who is, I believe, out of the office. So I don't know, but it just strikes me as kind of extraordinary to be asked to produce documents that weren't offered.
I'm just, they weren't offered and there was no objection at the time to what would have been apparent hearsay testimony. If the city is saying, no, they aren't going to provide them, I don't.
But you could, I believe you have the authority
To require it?
to require that, yes, and I guess I'm asking you to do that. I don't know what's the advantage of hiding the ball here.
I'm not trying to hide the ball. I'm just trying to go by the rules that were established, which was we bring and introduce exhibits and people can object and they're admitted or not. We don't offer exhibits that we don't think are necessary. So I'm just puzzled by this process.
So the city's position is that the appellant should contact the county demographer?
We have not been able to get information from the county when we have asked for it. So I can look and I can contact the witness and ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's table that. We'll come back to the discussion about that tomorrow. It would be appreciated if you would ask the witness, Ms. Campbell. And I will consider whether or not I'm going to require them to be submitted for viewing by myself or Mr. Brickland.
Thank you.
Okay, returning to the scheduling conversation, Mr. Seidels.
We are on for 8 o'clock tomorrow with my traffic witness.
Okay, so we have a plan. We're going to do traffic from 8 to 10, hard break at 10, changing witnesses and topics. We will move to Mr. Johnson. His direct testimony has been estimated at 45 minutes. Is that correct? I think that's what we were told.
That's what I estimated, yes.
Okay, so then with Cross, we will probably bump up against lunch. And so then after lunch, we would return to traffic. Is your oral arguments will also hard stop end by 11:30? That's right, Mr. Seidels? So you'll be back after lunch for sure.
I'll be back after lunch. I don't know if it will end at 11:30. That's
Got
kind of up to the court, but yeah.
Okay. So we have a plan for tomorrow. I have some business to do. I need to compile that list of documents that I've admitted and bring that to the parties to discuss in the housekeeping session. And then I've asked Mr. Sturbank to contact Ms. Campbell about those documents and voluntarily disclose them. And I will consider whether or not I feel I have whether I want to require them to be disclosed, even though they weren't offered or objected to when they were testified to. I think that's it for the day. Is that right? Yes,
quick?
Mr. Cartman.
No.
I'm sorry if I missed this earlier. Traffic back at 1 and whatever remains of Mr. Schramm, if anything, and Mr. Breland are the only witnesses for the rest of the afternoon.
I assume because the applicant's only other witness is not available till
until
Friday morning.
Okay, so
the city said they may call Mr. Rogers for brief testimony, so we could put that in there if we have that time and want to use it. If the city decides to call the witness.
okay, but no hard stop after 1 p.m.
Agreed. Anything else,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Taylor?
I guess again, I would just suggest that if we end up with extra time,
A rebuttal witness.
and
We'll
that
look into that. We'll see if
appellants have
something's
a rebuttal
possible.
witness.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Brickman, I didn't hear.
I'm sorry, I was talking over you. I apologize. I just said we'll look into that. I don't know. I don't want to commit at this point, but we'll explore it.
Great. And Mr. Seidels, you had another thought?
I was actually going to ask about rebuttal witnesses also, so never mind.
Okay. All right. So when we break at lunch, or when we come back after lunch, we'll check in about rebuttal witnesses at that point. Mr. Sturbank has his hand raised.
I'm trying not to talk over others. Additional housekeeping matter, since we had testimony on it, Exhibit C8, which is the system plan, we would offer. That was on both. That was on both the cities and appellants with exhibit list.
It was, and I don't know if we discussed that. Was there any objection to the city's update system water plan?
No, I think we can consider it for what it's worth.
Okay, so it will be admitted. C8 is officially admitted. I will again compile that list and we'll address the list of officially admitted exhibits tomorrow, and then reserve for housekeeping the discussion of which other exhibits are admitted or objected to. All right, thanks everybody. It's 6 and I'm at the end, so it's good that we're done, and I will see you all tomorrow morning at 8.
Thank you.
Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers has business. Yes.
Apologies, just a quick programming note. We will do our best to compile get the video compiled and distributed this evening. Just advising it, the longer the proceedings are, the longer it takes for Zoom to compile it. So we will do our best to get them out as soon as we possibly can tonight.
Thank you, and thanks for getting last night's out to us as quickly as possible.
Of course, thank you.
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.